What's going on, everyone? My name is Hunter, and welcome to the first episode of the highly requested SvelteKit and PocketBase mini-series. In this series, we're going to build and deploy a full-stack application using SvelteKit and PocketBase. And in this video in particular, we're going to be implementing the core user management and authentication functionality into our application, which is going to include registration, login, email verification, and password resets. So I know that my previous video covered the basics of authentication with PocketBase. However, we're going to be using PocketBase's 0.8 release candidate for this, which introduced a ton of breaking changes. So I felt that it was best just to go ahead and start over from scratch to start this series off on the right foot and to not cause any confusion. Now, I'm not going to go as deep into the PocketBase documentation as I did in my previous video because the auth store has not changed much. The methods have not changed much. It's more so the collections themselves inside of PocketBase. So please do go check out that video. I'll leave a link in the description with timestamps to the specific part where I go over the auth store and how PocketBase handles authentication and how we handle it on the server side as well. And so to get started, we'll just need to do some initial setup at first, which is going to include creating our directory structure, downloading the latest version of PocketBase, and then initializing our SvelteKit application. All right, so we're going to be creating a monorepo, which is going to contain an apps directory. And then within that apps directory, we're going to have backend, which is going to contain our PocketBase executable, as well as any of the PocketBase configurations that we might need. And then we're also going to have a web directory inside of apps, and that's where we're going to initialize our SvelteKit application, and that's where that's going to live. So let's go ahead and start out by creating this. We're going to call this Showcase for now. The name may change in the future, but for now, we're going to call it Showcase. And then within this, I'm going to create an apps directory. And then within apps, I'm going to create a backend directory. And then let's navigate into backend. And this is where our PocketBase is going to live, like I had just mentioned. So we actually need to download that. So we can download that if we go to our browser here. And I'm actually going to be downloading the release candidate 0.8.0 release candidate 2. But if you're watching this video in a few weeks or a few days, whenever the actual v0.8 is out of release candidate stage, you will just be able to download it from the website. But I just went to releases, PocketBase/PocketBase/releases. And then I scroll into assets here and I'm going to download the AMD 64 version. So all I have to do is just say curl-l-o and then PB8. And then I will have the link pasted here. And that's going to download a zip file. And then we can unzip that zip file with unzip PB8. And then now you'll be able to see that we just have a license, PB8, and PocketBase. I'm going to remove PB8 here because that's the zip file. We don't need that. And then I'm going to do something that's very important. I'm actually going to create a .getignore, which is going to ignore our PB data directory because we don't want to commit our database to our public Git repository, right? So I'm going to create a getignore here, and I'm just going to ignore PB_data for now. And then we can go ahead and see if this works. We can just do ./PocketBase serve, and that's going to start our PocketBase server on localhost or 127.0.0.1. And we can actually navigate to this URL in our browser right now. If we go here, you'll see that it's going to prompt us to create our first admin account. And we are now logged into PocketBase. So a few things that we're going to do first. The first thing I'm going to do is to set up an extra admin user. I've locked myself out a couple of times and I wasn't using a proper email. You can obviously edit the database as well, but I think it's best practice just to create another admin user. So I'm going to create another one with another dummy email account that I have. That's just in case, again, you forget your password or you lock yourself out. Okay, awesome. We can also edit the application settings. So we'll change the application name to Showcase. The URL is fine and we'll save changes there. We are going to be setting up mail. We're going to be using Mailgun, but you could use any of the options that PocketBase supports. I think they have a few different recommended providers, but we're going to be using Mailgun for this video just to send our email verification, our password resets, and our email change confirmations. Okay, so I think this is all we need to do here for right now. Again, if you've used PocketBase in the past, you'll notice that things are different. I'm not going to focus too much on the differences today. We're going to be starting out as if you're new to PocketBase and you have no idea how any of this has looked in the past. But for now, let's go ahead and go back into our terminal here. We're going to actually instantiate our SvelteKit application. So I'll navigate back into the directory that we just created. And I'm going to actually just initialize a fresh SvelteKit application. And I'm going to call it web. And then I'm going to opt out of all of this here and just keep these three. and then I'll navigate into web here. And then we're going to actually do something first. I'm going to initialize Tailwind CSS. So you can just run npx svelte-add and then at latest Tailwind CSS. And it'll take care of setting up all the proper Tailwind stuff behind the scenes for you. And then we can also just run npm I to install all of the dependencies. Okay, so now that we have these, we can actually install Daisy UI as well. That's what we're going to be using as our UI component library for this, which is super nice, super easy to use, extendable. And then the last thing that we need to add for now is going to be the latest PocketBase or the next PocketBase SDK for JavaScript. And again, if you're watching this video in the future, you may just need to install PocketBase, regularly. But for now, since this is still in a release candidate stage, I'm going to install the next version of it. So I'll do npm install PocketBase at next. And then we should be good to go ahead and open this up in VS Code. All right, so one thing we have to do first is we actually have to edit our Tailwind config to add Daisy UI as a plugin for this. So we'll say require Daisy UI here. That way it knows to use Daisy UI. And then we can go ahead and start to set up some of the pieces of the application that we're going to need. So I think the first thing that we want to do is probably set up our hooks, because the hooks are the most important piece to this puzzle. Everything else, we'll have to do extra work if we don't do this first. So inside of our source directory, we're going to create a new file and we're going to call it hooks.server.js. And we're going to first import PocketBase. And then we're going to set up export const handle, which is the hook function. It's going to be asynchronous, and it's going to take in an event and a resolve. And then we're going to set event.locals.pb to a new PocketBase instance. And it's going to take in the URL of our PocketBase instance itself, which is localhost 8090 or 127.0.0.1 depending on how your host files are set up. And then we're going to set the authstore load from cookie method, which is basically going to take in the cookie. So basically, if we have a cookie called pb_auth, it's going to grab that cookie out and then update the authstore with information from that cookie. If we don't, it's just going to set the authstore to empty or unauthorized, right? So we'll say load from cookie, and then we'll say event.request.headers.get. So right now we're getting the header, right? We're getting the cookie. And then if there's not one, we're going to just pass an empty string there. And then what I like to do here is I actually like to kind of set some things up for myself. So I would say if event.locals.pb.authstore.isValid. Again, if you're confused as to what I'm doing here, I've done this in the previous video. There's a link in the description with a timestamp that talks just about this section here. Please go watch that piece so that you have an understanding as to what's going on. I just don't want to drag this video out when a lot of people have already seen that one. So I'm basically checking to see if the user is valid. So if if the authstore is valid, I want to set event.locals.user equaled to the event.locals.pb.authstore.model. Now, before we can do this though, PocketBase is going to return non-POJOs or non-plain old JavaScript objects. It's going to have methods and different data types than what JavaScript is aware of. So what we actually need to do is we actually need to serialize those models first, or those objects first, and convert them into a POJO. We can do that. Let me make sure that I'm running on the proper node version here. So I am running on version 18.12. So you do need to be, I think, above 17 in order for this to work. What we're going to do is inside of our source directory, we're actually going to create a new directory called lib. And then we're going to create a file called utils.js. And then inside of this, we're actually going to export const serialize non-POJOs. And that's going to take in an object. And then it's going to return a structured clone of the object. Now, a structured clone, from what I've researched, and I actually just recently found out about this, it's, again, a deep clone of an object, but it's essentially like doing json.parse, json.stringify, except I believe it's faster and just better overall. You don't have to download anything for this. This is included with JavaScript after node version, I believe 17. So now that we have this helper or this utility function here, we can now bring this into our hooks. So import this, and then what we'll say is we'll say serialize non-POJOs, and then we'll pass in event.locals.pb.authstore.model. And again, the reason I'm doing this is just so that when I'm accessing the user inside of locals throughout my application, I don't need to type this long thing in. I guess I just make it a little bit shorter, right? I cut down on some of the typing. And then we'll say else, we'll set the user to undefined. So event.locals.user equals undefined. And then, so once this happens, we'll actually await resolve here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say response.headers.set, and we'll say set cookie event.locals.pb.authStore.export to cookie. So what we're doing is we're now taking all the information from the current auth store and exporting it into a cookie, and then passing it to and setting it in the headers before we return the response back to the client. And then for the time being, I'm going to set this to false because our PocketBase server right now is not running on HTTPS, nor is our application itself. And then we can return response. So just to, I guess, go over again what the hook is doing here is essentially right now, hooks are run on every single request to our SvelteKit application. What's going to happen first is it's going to set PocketBase to a new PocketBase instance. And then it's going to grab the cookie from our browser if we have one. And it's going to, this load from cookie method actually will check the cookie to make sure if it's expired or not. And then it'll pull all the information from the cookie and then set that to our auth store. And then we're checking to see, okay, is this auth store valid? So if, for example, the cookie was expired or there wasn't a cookie at all, this is obviously going to be false. So it will set the user to undefined. But if it is valid, it's going to then serialize that model, that user model, and set that to our event.locals.user. And then anything else that happens within our application is going to take place under the await resolve event. So basically anything else that we're doing, if we're updating the database, if we're adding to-dos, which is not what we're going to be doing in this video, but if we're editing the user profile, anything else that we're doing server side is going to happen here, right? So once all that happens, what we want to do is we want to take that latest auth store, because things in the auth store could have changed since the last request, right? When all of this happens, something could have changed. So then we're going to set the cookie to the latest auth store, right? We're going to export the latest auth store into a cookie and return that to the client. So the next time they make a request, they go through this process again, they have the latest and greatest auth store in their cookie to load in. And that's essentially how this hook works. Okay, so now I think we can go ahead and start to set up some of the other pieces of our application, like the layout. So the first thing that I'm going to do is inside of my routes directory, I'm going to create a +layout.server.js. And this is going to take in, or it's going to return or export a load function, right? Which is going to load information and pass it down into our application. And this is going to take in locals, right? And that's the same locals that we were manipulating in the handle function. And we'll say if locals.user, so basically if this is not undefined in our case, right? We're going to return the user as locals.user. And then otherwise, we're going to return the user as undefined. And again, this is going to give us access to user in the data prop of our entire application, right? So we can use it wherever. We can get the user's name. We can check to see if they even exist. That'll tell us if they're logged in or not. So we can set this for now. I think this is all we're going to need here. And then inside of our layout.svelte, what we'll do is we're going to set up the initial app structure. And a lot of these are going to be Daisy UI components, but let's go ahead and set the initial structure up. So I'm going to set the minimum height to full. I believe this is going to go underneath the slot. I'm also going to set up a navbar, which is going to be class of navbar BG base 100. Again, all of these are Daisy UI components. I've just manipulated some of them to fit our specific needs. And we're going to have, this is where our logo is going to go. So it's going to be an A with a class of button, button ghost, normal case, and text XL. And then we're going to just pass this a slash for the href, and it's going to be called showcase. And that's going to be our application's name for the time being. All right. And then we're going to set up another class with another div with a flex none. And what we're going to do here is we're actually going to check to see if there's no data.user, right? And this is where we're going to be able to show the login or registration buttons if their user's not logged in. But if they are logged in, we obviously don't want to show that. So we'll say if not data.user, and I actually need to export let data here to accept that data prop. Then we're going to create another div with a dropdown class and dropdown -end. And we're going to have two links. Both of them are going to be classed as buttons. One of them is going to be for login. That's going to go to our login page once we create that. And then the other is going to be for register, and that's going to go to our register page once we create that. Okay, and then we're going to say else. So basically, if there is a user then, right, we want to show another dropdown. This is going to be an add projects button. So I'm going to name this, I'm going to make a button, and we'll say this is going to go to /project/new. Again, we haven't created these directories yet, but we will. And we'll say add project. And then beside that, we're going to have the user's avatar, right? So we'll say div.class, or I'm sorry, div.dropdown, dropdown n again. And then we're going to set up a label and a class of avatar there. And it's going to yell at us. So what we can do is we can actually just fix this here in just a second. And then we're also going to have a div with the class of width 10 and rounded full. And we'll have an image. And we're going to use a placeholder image for the time being. We'll eventually update this to the user's avatar once we get to that step. And this is just going to have it won't have a class at all because the avatar class here will take care of the proper styling of this for us. So we can actually do a quick fix here, and I can disable these. When I was reading the Daisy UI documentation, the reason this has to be here is because of an issue with the Safari browser. Apparently it doesn't recognize buttons, or it doesn't recognize them if the tab index is not there. I'm not sure what the specific error was, but there is an issue, I guess, with Safari, and that's why we have to use this, and that's why we have to ignore these errors. Okay, so now for the actual menu that's going to drop down from this, I'm just going to copy this over here. This is basically just going to be the drop down menu, and again, we're going to have to ignore this as well. And it's just going to have a few different things. It's going to have my projects, settings, and logout. And now we can actually start the application up, I believe. Let me make sure we're not missing anything. We actually are. We actually need to wrap this in a container as well, our slot or the rest of our application. And now we should be good to actually run our application. So let's do npm run dev. And then now if we go to localhost 5173, we're going to see that we are on showcase. And I think I actually need to adjust the register button here. I'm going to change the color of that to secondary. And then I'm also going to adjust the theme. So I'm actually going to go into the app.html, and I'm going to say data-theme is light. And there we go. So now we have our login and register navbar. Once we're actually logged in, you'll see the avatar in the top right as well. But this is essentially the skeleton of our application here. So now I guess the first thing that we want to do is probably set up the registration page, because that's where we're going to actually create our users. So let's go into and I'm actually going to minimize this terminal now so I quit switching back and forth to it. Let's go into our routes, and we'll create a register, and we'll have a plus page.svelte. We'll also have a plus page.server.js. And then for the plus page.svelte, we're going to have a div, which we're going to actually go ahead and set up the outside structure for the form. And then we're going to have like a title at the top, which is going to say register for an account. And then register for an account. And then we'll have a paragraph tag. And we'll set the text to center and a little bit of margin at the top. And we'll say and we'll set up a link. And we'll say login, right? We'll say login if you already have an account, right? And this will say text primary. We'll change the color of that. We'll make the font a little bit thicker. And then we'll set a hover cursor pointer and hover underline. And we'll say sign in if you already have an account. And we can see what this looks like real quick. If we go to our login page, I actually made this register page. So register for an account. It looks like my styles aren't updating. So let me just save my app.postcss. Sometimes you have to do that in order to get the styles to take place. So this looks pretty good. And again, I'm pretty zoomed in right now, so obviously it won't be taking up this much screen real estate in your application, but I want to make sure everybody can see it, even on mobile devices. Awesome. So we can register for an account now. Now let's go ahead and set up our form. So again, I'm going to be using the Daisy UI components for this. I'm going to be using the form inputs or the text inputs here, and that's going to be inside of our register page here. So let's first set up the form. So it's going to be a form. The action is going to be !/register. It's going to hit our register form action that we're going to set up. The method is going to be post, and we're going to set up some classes here. So we're going to have flex call, item center, space y2, width full, and padding top 2. And then inside of this is we're going to have our actual inputs. So I'm going to actually just copy over one of them, and this is going to be our name. So the user is going to put in a name. We're also going to have an email as well. So we'll change this to email. The label for is going to be email, and then the type is going to be email, and the name is going to be email. And then we're also going to have one for password and password confirm. And so we'll copy this down one more time here, and we'll say password. We'll change up these labels here to password, and then we'll copy this again for our password confirm. Is it password? Yeah, I think it's password confirm. It's either password confirm or confirm password. I can never remember which one it actually is. Okay, so we're also going to need a button. So let's just set that up too as well. Div, and we'll set a width of full and a max width of medium so that it lines up with the rest of our form here. And then we'll have a button. The type is going to be submit, and the classes are going to be button primary, and width full, and we're going to say register here. So now when we take a look at this, it looks pretty good. We have our inputs, we have our password fields. And the nice thing about this is that we can just copy this over to our sign-in page and just keep the email and password and update some links, and we'll be good to go. So now that we have the front-end logic taken care of, we actually need to set up the actual registration piece of this pie. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to first go ahead into our page.server.js inside of register, and we're going to export const actions. And then we're going to set up a register action. It's going to be asynchronous. It's going to take in locals and request. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take out the form data. We need to get all that form data out of the registration form that we submit, right? So what we can say is we can say const body equals object.fromEntries await request.form data. This is going to give us access to an object with all of the fields mapped to the name of our registration form. And with the latest version of PocketBase, we actually have usernames as well. And this is, again, something that I think is debated upon whether you should ask for username at the beginning or just generate one for them and then allow them to edit it later. And I think that's what we're going to do first. We don't want to add any extra friction to the registration process. So we'll generate a random, or we'll let PocketBase generate a random username for them. Actually, we could probably do something similar to this ourselves. Actually, we could probably just create a generate username helper function here. So let's just create that now. So inside of our lib, inside of our utils, we can actually just create an export const generate username. And what we're going to do is we're just going to generate a random username based off of their name as well as some random bytes, right? So we'll take in the name and we're going to set an ID. So we're just basically going to get a random ID. And we need to actually import const random bytes equals await import node crypto. And this is again from the crypto library that's included with Node.js. And then what we can set up is we can say random bytes, and we'll say 2, and we'll say .toString hex, right? And then we can just return name.slice, and we'll take the first few characters of the name and then also append the ID to this as well. So let's just close that bracket there. So this is us generating a random username. The user will have the ability to change it later. PocketBase generates one automatically as well, but I think it's just called like user and a bunch of numbers. This will give them a little bit more of a custom username, but something we'll have to handle in the future is checking to see if the username exists or not, but we can take care of that in the future. Okay, so now that we have this set up, we can continue on with our registration piece. So what we'll do is we'll say let username equals generate username. We need to import that from our utils, and then we'll get the body.name.split. And the reason that we're splitting this, so basically the name could have spaces, right? And we want to actually just take all the spaces away and then generate the username without any spaces, right? And then we'll say .join, and we'll join it like that. And then we'll also set it to lowercase as well. Okay, so now we can set up a try catch, and we're actually going to create the user. So what we'll do is we'll say await locals.pb.collection, and we'll say users, create, and then we're going to pass an object here. So we're going to pass in username, and then we're also going to pass in ... form data. So we're going to spread form, or I'm sorry, body. So we're actually going to spread body, and we're also going to add username as well to this. We're essentially just adding one object with all the properties of body as well as username. And then what we want to do is we actually want to send the verification email. But for right now, we actually are going to need to set that up first. So let's just kind of set that up, and then we'll comment it out, and we'll set that up here in a second. So we'll say await locals.pb.collection users, and then we'll say request verification. And then we'll pass in body.email, right? So that to that email address that they just provided to us. And then we need to catch the errors. And I'm just going to console log the errors for now as well, so we can see them in our console when they do occur. And then we can just say throw error. And there's much better ways to handle these errors. Again, I'm just trying to kind of make the best use of our time here. And then what we're going to do is we're actually going to throw a redirect to the login page. I actually need to adjust where this just imported from. So what's going to happen is the user is going to register, and then once they register, it's going to redirect them to actually it should really redirect them to the login page so that they can log in. And then this request verification is actually going to send out the email to them, which we're going to set up in a second. And then they'll have to verify that email before we'll actually let them log in. So I think now is a good time to go ahead and set up Mailgun for our email. So Mailgun is one of the SMTP providers that PocketBase has listed on their site, but I'm pretty sure that you could use any of them. We're just going to use this because it's free to get started. It's easy to set up, and I've used it before. So you're going to want to come to mailgun.com, and you're going to want to click Get Started. You're going to go through the account creation process. You do not need to add payment info at this point in time. You can uncheck this box. You'll only be able to allow to send to 5 authorized recipients, but I'm going to go ahead and register with a new account and then walk you all through how that's going to look. Okay, so now that we've signed up for Mailgun and verified our account, I had to put in my phone number, I think probably because I've made 10 accounts in the past couple of days. But what you want to do is we actually need to add some authorized recipients to our account here. So what we can do is we can go into our sandbox. This is going to show my API key probably in just a second. It may have already shown it, I'm not sure. But again, I'll obviously change that before this video is released. But with the free account, we actually have to confirm the recipients or verify the recipients' email addresses. And what I'd like to do with Gmail is it's a nice little trick. I can just put the email I use to create this account. I can add a plus sign, and I can just say Walt, for example. This is one email, and I'm just going to add a few of them. So I'm going to have Walt, I'm going to have Iris, I'm going to have Nala, and I'm going to have Hunter. And I think 4 is going to be good for now. Okay. So now we have 4 authorized email addresses that we can use. Now you can only send emails to these addresses unless you upgrade your account. Again, you can look at other providers if you'd like to see which one is the best pricing. I haven't really looked too much into that just yet, but that's something that definitely you want to consider. So now we need to actually set up SMTP. So we're going to select this to get our credentials here. It's going to show the SMTP hostname, the port, the username, and the password. So let's copy over this username, and let's go into our PocketBase backend. Under settings, we're going to go to mail settings, and then we're going to check this use SMTP mail server box. We're going to paste in our username, and I believe it was smtp.mailgun.org. They are using port 587, and then the password, we'll copy this default password over. And then we'll change the sender name to support@showcase. And then the sender address will actually set to this postmaster username here. And then we can click Save Changes. And now we can send a test email. So let's just send the verification template, for example, to one of the emails that we created. And they're all going to go to the same inbox here. It's just going to have a different to address. Okay, so I actually didn't verify these. So let me actually verify these first. So I have to check agree on all of these email addresses that I added here. Okay, so now that I've confirmed those, I should be able to send this email to this address now. Okay, so it says successfully sent test email. And if I go into my inbox now here, it's probably going to go into my spam folder once it gets here. Okay, so here's the email. It came through finally. And I can just say look safe here because, again, it's coming from a strange address. They think it's spam, which is fine. It now pops up in my inbox, and you can see it says, hello, thank you for joining us at Showcase. Click on the button below to confirm your email address. Thanks, Showcase team. Click verify. And then it's obviously going to be, in this case, it's going to be invalid or expired because of the fact that it was just a test email. But it does, in fact, get to our inbox, which is fantastic. So that means that when we register a new user now, we should also get this here as well. So I'm going to delete this from my inbox so I'm not confusing myself. And I'm going to come back to my application, and I'm going to create a new user with that email address that I had set up and verified with Mailgun. Okay, so we got an error here. So let's take a look at what we did wrong here. It's saying that the username object is the issue. So it's probably just a little typo on my end. If I go to utils, yeah, so I actually have two. If you look here, I have two of these brackets. So it's trying to put a bracket in the username. And later on in the application, we're going to implement form validation, which will allow us to essentially run a regex that will catch any of these things being passed into our name, for example. But for right now, we're just going to set this up. Okay, so that should work now. Okay, and we got redirected to a 404 not found. That's fine because we haven't set the login page yet, but let's just check to see if our username or our email actually got sent. So let's go into our spam here and we can see that it says verify your showcase email. I don't recall resetting the password. Did I send a password reset? I don't believe so, but okay. So we can see here that it did send all these emails here. I'll say look safe. This is probably because I clicked on send test email about 10 times while I was waiting, but we can actually just go ahead and verify this now. So I can click on verify and we can see that we successfully verified our email address. So now when we go back into PocketBase, if we go to our users and we refresh, we're going to see that Walt is verified. And it also has a randomly generated username, WaltW103C. Great, so this is working. Now we can actually set up a login form as well. So let's go ahead and do that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create another user and I'm going to show you how we can verify, or I guess inform them that if their email isn't verified, they can't log in, okay? So let's go into our application. Let's close out. Actually, I'm going to copy over the email and password from this. Actually, I'll just copy all of this from the register page for now. And I'm going to create a login route with a plus page.svelte and a plus page.server.js. I'll paste all of this in and I'm going to just take away the name field. I'm going to take away the password confirm and I'm going to change this to login. And then I'm going to change up the title a bit. So log in to your accounts or register if you don't already have an account. So now if we go to login, you can see that we do in fact have a login page. That takes us to register. This takes us to login, which is great. Okay, now we actually need to set up some of the functionality of this, and we can do that inside of our page.server.js. So we're going to say export const actions. And we're going to set up a login action. It's going to be asynchronous, of course. And it's going to take in request and locals. And then we're going to say, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to say const body equals await object.from entries await request.form data. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say try await locals.pb.collection users.auth with password. Then we're going to say body.email and body.password. So now what's going to happen is this is actually going to update our auth store with that model, right? That user model. So what we can actually do is we can check to see if they're verified because they actually have a verified property on them. So we can say if not locals.pb.authstore.model.verified. Then we want to say locals.pb.authstore.clear. So basically we want to log them out instantly. So if they're not verified, we're going to instantly log them out before we even let the user do any type of interactions. And then what we're going to do is we're going to return not verified is true. Okay, and that'll be returned in that form prop. If you're not familiar with how form props work or how the form data gets passed back into the page through action data, you can watch my form actions video. I go into that a bit as well as the form validation video. We're going to catch the error and we're just going to console log the error for now and throw an error. And again, we'll probably do some error refinements later on in the video, so don't stress too much about this. We'll probably also implement some form validation as well in this series to kind of catch any of those gotchas, people trying to pass in symbols and things like that in their usernames to break things. And then if everything is successful, so basically if this is not true, or if this is true, if they are verified, then we're just going to redirect them to the home page. So they'll be nice and signed in, right? Okay, so let's just make sure. I think I actually still need to update the action here. So it's now going to be /login instead of /register. This all looks good. This all looks good. Everything looks okay. And then what we're going to do is we actually need to set up an alert for the not verified, right? So what we'll do is we'll first take in script, and we'll say export let form. And then what we're going to check for is we're going to say, I guess we'll put this underneath of the button. I think that'll work just fine if we just put it underneath the button and still within the form though. We'll say if form.notVerified, then we're going to get an alert from Daisy UI. So let me just go to Daisy UI and grab an alert component. And I guess this would be an error. So we'll just copy this over and paste it in. And then we'll say, you must verify your email before you can log in. So now let's go into our application and let's attempt to register with another user. And we're not going to verify the email address, and we'll try to log in and see what happens. So I just registered, and now let's try to log in. And we can see that we get, you must verify your email before you log in. It doesn't seem to be styled here. Actually, I should probably put that. Am I not within my form container at the moment? I thought the form had a, let me change this max width. Let's set the width to full. It's the max width to medium. And let me actually just resave my styles here. Okay, there we go. So now it's showing. So you must verify your email before you can log in. So now let's go ahead and verify that email. I know this looks confusing because I'm in one inbox, but if you look here at the two, I can see that these went to two different people, right? So for this one, I'm going to verify here. I successfully verified the address. Now I can actually log in. And we get redirected to the home page. And now you can actually see that we do have this add project button here, as well as a nice drop down with a user picture. Okay, great. So now we have the login and register set up. Now we can actually set up the logout functionality as well. And that's just going to be an endpoint. So let's go into our routes and we'll create a new folder called logout. And then what we'll do is we'll create a new file called plusserver.js. And this is going to say export const post. It's going to take in locals. And all we have to do here is either say locals.pb.authstore.clear. And then we'll set locals.user to undefined. And then we'll throw a redirect to /login. So now this should clear out our cookie. If we open up our DevTools here and we go to application and we go to cookies, we can see that we have the pb_auth cookie here. Let me zoom that in so you guys can see it. And then if we click on logout now, I want to actually fire off that action. So let me go ahead and edit the layout real quick. So for our logout button, it actually is already set up because I copied it over. So we have action is going to /logout, which is the root logout route endpoint here, making a post request, and it's just going to clear the auth store. We don't actually have to pass a user ID or anything in there. It's just going to handle it all for us. So let's go ahead and click logout. You can see that the cookie was cleared and we are logged out of our account. All right, so now what we want to implement is the ability for users to reset their password if they forgot it, right? And if we look at PocketBase and we come into users, we can go to API preview. It's going to show us all of these methods here. And what we want to do is we look at the request email change. And this is the method we actually have to run here. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to set up a different page. We're going to take the users to if they say they forgot their password, for example. And then we'll enable them to put in their email address. And then once they put the email address in, we'll send them an email where they can go and actually change the password. So let's go ahead and set it up inside of our application. And I'm going to close out of all of these for right now, actually, except for the login page. I'm going to copy this form. I'm going to copy all of this actually, and I'll just take out what I need. We'll create a new route called reset-password. It's going to have a plus page.svelte. It's also going to have a plus page.server.js. In the plus page.svelte, we'll just paste in all of this stuff and we'll say reset your password. And then I think we can just get rid of, actually we can just get rid of this link, and then we'll just say, we'll send you an email with a link to reset your password. And then all we need is the email form. We don't need our email field. We don't need password. We also don't need to do this form not verified thing right here either. And then this will say reset or request password reset. And then for the action, we're actually going to say reset password. We'll have to create that action here in a second, but I think that'll be good to go. Let's look at that page now. If we go to /reset password, yeah, this looks pretty good. So they just type the email in and then it should send them a reset password link. So let's go ahead and set up those actions now, or the action, I guess you could say. So let's go ahead and say export const actions on our reset password page.server. And we're going to say reset password. It's going to take in a request and locals per usual. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do the same thing. We're going to say const body equals object.from entries. And then we'll say await request.form data. And then what we'll do is we'll set up a try block. We'll say await locals.pb.collection, and then it's going to be the user's collection. And then we're going to say request password reset, and then we're going to pass in body.email. And then what we'll do is here, for the time being, we'll just return success is true, and then catch the error, console log it, and then we'll throw an error. And again, like I said, we will fix these up, I promise. Okay, so the reason I want to return success is true here is because I want to show like an alert, for example, if their email was successfully sent so that they know to go ahead and check it. So what we can do is inside of our reset password page, we can accept the form prop. And then we'll grab an alert component from Daisy UI again. We'll grab a success colored alert. And then this time we'll say if form.success, then we want to show this, right? And then we say width full, max width medium, so it lines up with the rest of the form. And we'll say an email has been sent to reset your password. Okay, so let's go ahead and test this out now. So if I type this email in, we can see that an email has been sent to reset your password. And for some reason, my styles are acting a little weird today. I keep having to resave this. Okay, so an email has been sent to reset your password. So let's check our email to see if that did in fact come. And we go into a spam. We can see it says reset your password. I think this was just sent. Actually, this was sent a while ago. Here it is. It just popped up. Okay, reset your showcase password. So I can say look safe, and then it'll go to my inbox. And then I can actually click on this and it brings me to a PocketBase type interface. And this is what I mentioned that we can actually set up our own custom pages for eventually. But for right now, this is functional. It works. And I can change the password. So I'll change it to something else. And I click set new password. And then I can now sign in with my new password. So if I close out of this and I go back, my old password was password. Let's try to log in with that. So something went wrong. So there was an error logging in. But if I type in the right password, which is password 123 now, you can see that we now get back the home page and we have our user logged in. So now let's make that a little bit easier for the user to actually go ahead and access that. And we can set up like a little link on our login form that'll have them, it'll say forgot password ? And they can click on that and access that page. So let's go back into our login form and then we'll put this underneath of password here. So above the button, we'll set up another div with a width full, max width of medium. And we'll just add an A tag here and we'll make the font a bit bigger, the primary color, and we'll say hover cursor pointer. And it'll take us to reset password. And I'll actually do hover underline as well. And then I'm going to say forgot password. And then she'll click that and it'll take them to the reset password page. So let's log out now. And then now we can see that we have this forgot password button here, or this link we can click and it takes us to the reset password page. Okay, so I think that's going to conclude today's video on user management with PocketBase and SvelteKit. This is the first episode of the mini series. The next episode is going to be, we're going to actually manage the user's profile. So we'll be able to upload an avatar, change the username, change the name, and things of that nature. So that's all coming up in the next episode. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.